is less than 50 years old. It's about a planet that must be saved.
That world is an unpeaceful world, it's an unjust world, it's an unsafe world. Is it naive to say that we need to build a clean, green world?
Greenpeace has been in the forefront of the ecological fight for the last 40 years and become one of the loudest and most feared voices of this threatened world. Although powerful now, at the start it was just a small group of people with long hair.
We started out as a bunch of hippies, you know, and we were a bunch of hippies for a long time.
From the beginning, they adopted a method.
L'action de Greenpeace, c'est pas tellement pour mettre une banderole et dire regardez le logo, c'est dire regardez ce qui se passe là, vous ne l'avez pas vu jusqu'à maintenant.
Direct action and shocking images. This method was key to their success. Greenpeace has had an exceptional destiny. Its story has followed the progress in the ecology movement and the crises. But the initial inspiration remains.
My mother used to joke about the chutzpah of believing that 3 or 4 people sitting around a kitchen table could change the world. And yet, we did change the world.
At the beginning of the 1970s, the world was divided by borders, walls and blocks. The communist bloc in the east and the capitalist bloc in the west. The planet was a sports ground where each bloc was running in the arms race and playing at war, using small countries as go-betweens. In Vietnam, the American army supported the South against the communist North. It was emired in a bloody and unpopular conflict. To escape this dirty war, many young Americans crossed the border into Canada. Vancouver, a quiet city on the west coast, was shaken by the arrival of all these young Americans, heroes of the counterculture and of protest.
There was a very powerful peace movement in Vancouver because so many peace activists coming from the United States, as well as Canadian pacifist movement and Quakers. And so there was this mix.
Communists, anarchists, hippies. You could feel something in the air, something is happening, something percolating.
The spark to ignite this powder keg came from the USA itself, when it announced that nuclear testing would restart on an island off Alaska. These underground tests would be carried out on a seismic fault with the risk of triggering an earthquake or a tsunami. Because of its geographical position, Vancouver had front row seats. The demonstrations multiplied.
They were there because they thought the nuclear arms race was insanity, and it had to be stopped.
We were just pissed off, you know. I mean, we were just, they're doing this? Well, we're not going to let that happen. That's crazy.
A motley group was formed under the leadership of Irving Stowe, an American lawyer who had become a Quaker, and Jim Bolin, a former military engineer who had resigned. Ecologists joined these militant pacifists, and the association of the two strands led to the creation of a new movement.
There's sort of 2 places Greenpeace was born. One was the Stowe's household, and the other is the basement of the Unitarian Church. And at the end of the meeting, Irving Stowe would always say peace. And at the end of one of those meetings, I said, you know, we should make that a Greenpeace.
Which I remember thinking was ridiculous at the time. Didn't make any sense to me.
The next day, Bill said, my father called him up and said, I can't stop thinking about what you said. The environment and the peace movement, this puts them together.
At the following meeting, he came back and said, that's it. That's what we should use. That's going to be the name of the organization now.
Greenpeace was born, and at that time, it didn't scare anyone. Stopping the American nuclear tests on Amchitka seemed rather an ambitious project.
We were trying to figure out how could we bring the attention of the media, because we realized that without grabbing the media, we were just a handful of people at that point. We had no resources.
They decided to charter a ship to go to the area. But who would be crazy enough to take on a bunch of hippies and sail to the waters off Alaska?
And eventually they found John Cormack and his boat, the Phyllis Cormack. And we needed $10,000 for the charter fee. You can't do that selling buttons.
A benefit concert was organised, gathering an audience of 10,000 people. It raised sufficient funds to charter the ship. The Phyllis Cormack was in fact an old fishing vessel and not really suited to this adventure. But this was the age of optimism. The project hit the headlines and a new face appeared on our TV screens.
And it's just such madness that it's almost a logical area to attack, because two different kinds of madness have come together there. There's the Cold War madness, and there's the let's pollute, it doesn't matter, the main thing is to make a buck, and that madness is there too. So you're attacking both of them.
In September 1971, the Phyllis Cormack set sail to challenge the might of America. 12 people were on board. They weren't entirely aware of the real dangers, nor were they sure of the final outcome. But from this first voyage, the founding principles of Greenpeace were defined. The first was based on a concept from the Quaker religion.
Irving Stowe comes from the Quaker tradition. And in that tradition, one bears witness to events. And if that's all you can do, one has done something very important.
The key word or the buzzword was to bear witness. And the idea is that by performing some action to oppose an action by a government that you felt was unethical, immoral, by putting yourself on the line, whether it be risking jail or even death, it really grabbed people's attention.
To bear witness to something that's being hidden from us, and to use the media for that purpose. That's the second principle of Greenpeace. On board the Phyllis Cormack were several journalists. Ben Metcalf reported on the adventure for Radio Canada. Bob Hunter wrote for the Vancouver Sun. He was an exceptional person and went on to become the first president of Greenpeace.
Bob Hunter had the ability to inspire people, and this was very important, as he was a natural leader.
He was very much the philosopher of the organization, but he was definitely a real visionary for the environmental movement, I think, as a whole.
Hunter filed his column every day. His aim was to maintain public interest in this improbable voyage.
We brought the media with us on our campaigns. We actually became our own media if we had to.
This is Ben Metcalf aboard the Greenpeace reporting to Radio Noon. The Greenpeace has now been out nearly a month on its voyage of protest against the U.S. hydrogen bomb test at Antarctica.
I remember the transmissions from the Greenpeace being electrifying. Ben Metcalf's voice crackling, with the static. Sometimes it was almost hard to make out, and you could hear the waves in the background.
Ashore, there was a whole organization sending out the news coming from the ship.
This is Dorothy Metcalf of the Greenpeace ashore. Yes. One moment, please. I'll start our recorder. Thank you.
I designed my own job, knowing how news moves, what the media needs, and I made a list of all the radio stations in Vancouver, plus the news agencies, both national and international.
Yes.
The beauty, or the brilliance, if you will, of Greenpeace is that it has taken the idea of bearing witness and used it to capture the eyes of the media.
But the Americans postponed the date of the nuclear test. Doubts started to emerge.
Should we go on? Should we go back? What's the weather going to be like? Can we survive out there? How is this going to play in the media? What's the important thing for the world to know?
In the Gulf of Alaska, the sea became rougher as the storms broke. Following another postponement, after a voyage of over a month, the crew decided to return home by a majority of 7 votes to 5.
They had to turn back because this fishing trawler could not have made it.
We were disappointed, we were angry, there was a lot of shouting. We talked about it interminably.
They returned to port after 45 days at sea. Behind the smiles, there was bitterness, the feeling of failure. Jim Bolin even suggested dissolving the movement. Bob Hunter dissuaded him. They had succeeded in creating a media event. The Greenpeace method had been defined. And they were soon proved right. The USA did indeed detonate their bomb in November 1971. It was supposed to be followed by 5 more tests. But Nixon decided to stop the campaign. Greenpeace's fight was to continue. It didn't focus only on the American neighbour, but the world in its entirety. Ecology looks at the Earth as a whole, a world without borders. That was another of Greenpeace's founding principles, and completely new at the time.
And not long after that, the French announced that they would be doing atmospheric testing in the South Pacific, and that kind of rang the alarm bell for the Greenpeace group. What's to be done? And Ben Metcalfe said, now is the time. I will call the Wellington Post and tell them we need a boat, and we need a captain. Almost overnight, there was a reply.
David McTaggart answered the call. Looking a bit like a pirate, the Canadian businessman was enjoying a peaceful early retirement at the age of 40 on his yacht in New Zealand.
He saw on the map this prohibited zone around the atoll of Mururoa in international waters where a government was saying, you can't go as a sailor. That just made him angry. It just made him angry. It offended his sense of liberty. So that is actually what drove him to say, yeah, I'll take on this mission.
Bring them to their knees. We can bond the world to pieces.
Now, he actually sailed this tiny little boat into this nuclear weapons test zone, not knowing if the bomb was going to go off or not, and challenged one of the biggest military forces on the planet.
McTaggart reached the Mururoa Atoll after sailing 4,700 kilometers. He had only just entered the forbidden zone when a naval unit boarded the yacht. Contrary to statements by the French army, McTaggart was badly beaten, injuring his eye. These photos taken by a crew member were widely disseminated. They made McTaggart famous around the world. The French military had thought that the remoteness of Mururoa Atoll would protect them from international media attention. They were wrong. Silence reigned no more over the Pacific atoll. One year later, France decided to stop atmospheric nuclear testing. Between pacifism and Cold War, the UN organised that year in Stockholm an Earth Summit, the first of that name. Delegates from about 100 countries debated pollution, this massive pollution caused by post-war industrialisation. Under the slogan, "Only One Earth," the concept of pollution beyond borders emerged. It was the central idea of the environmental movement, going against the world's paranoid ideas at the time. On the other hand, in the counterculture, for the groups of young pacifists who set up camp just outside Stockholm, the idea of borders was already out of date. That was the idea of the Greenpeace founders. All they needed was to bring it to life, for the environment wasn't yet front-page news.
There were people within the group who felt we should stay focused on nuclear weapons, but there was this bigger ecology issue that we wanted to address.
One of our objectives, probably one of our main objectives in that time, was to make environment an issue.
We wanted to do something large on a grand scale that the whole world could see, and to start an ecology movement. And so this is why we ended up deciding to do the whale campaign.
Bob, in particular, saw it as a huge opportunity for what he calls the mind bomb.
The whales could be a symbol for ecology and for wilderness.
Since the 19th century, whales had been mercilessly slaughtered. In spite of repeated appeals for a moratorium on hunting, the whaling nations, led by Japan, Russia, Iceland and Norway, continued the massacre and killed up to 100,000 whales each year. A subscription provided funding for the expedition, and the Phyllis Cormac set sail again, this time with thousands of people to see it off.
All the Greenpeace is sailing, they're crazy as hell. They'd be riding the big ocean in a hollowed out shell. They'll probably get seasick, or they'll probably go blind. They're probably on drugs, or at least out of their minds. What is a whale but a
Greenpeace wasn't yet a well-known organisation, but the crew was already becoming international.
We have two things. One of them is that we'd like to point out to everybody that we're not just a Canadian boat with a Canadian crew, that we are in fact an international crew flying under a United Nations flag. We have people here from all over the world who can speak a bunch of different languages. And one of the languages we're learning to speak here is whale.
It took 2 months of hunting before the Soviet whaling ships were finally spotted. There were 3 ships in the fleet, 1 factory ship and 2 harpoon ships. It was time to launch the inflatable Zodiacs. The Zodiac, a new ingredient, completed the Greenpeace method.
It's a floating slaughterhouse for whales. Terrible, it's stench, it's horrible. There's a big pipe coming out of the side of this boat. Blood is just pouring out of this pipe. And the smell, you can smell it from a long way away. It looked like a death scene.
Greenpeace's idea was simple: to get between the whale and the harpooner to prevent the latter from firing.
Every time the harpooner got to go a shot, I would maneuver the boat to block him. And this was working really good, and I looked at Bob and I said, this is great and everything. And then the captain on the Russian whaling boat came down the catwalk and he screamed into the ear of the harpooner. Then he looked at us and he went like that.
And I'm thinking he's not going to shoot, but I can see he's turning the harpoon like this. And it looks to me like maybe he's going to do it. He's going to do it. And it does. Boom, we hear the explosion. And there's this cable attached, and the cable comes right down beside their boat. It could have killed them, easily killed them. We were telling a story for the world media. We had to have the photographs, we had to have the images on film, because if we just went back and told the story, it wasn't good enough.
A boat in front of a harpoon to save a whale. And that simple image just declared, in a single shot, you got it. And, are you with the harpooner? Are you with the whale? Which side are you on? And it drew a black and white line between 2 possibilities, and it forced you to choose. Bringing people to the scene of the crime and then confronting them with a choice. What do you want to do with this? What's your opinion? That issue became a metaphor for what we were asking people to do. I'm asking you to take action. I'm asking you to take a stand. I'm asking you to make a moral choice between right and wrong and do something about it.
the Greenpeace method would demonstrate its effectiveness with seal cubs. Hundreds of thousands of these white coats, as they're called in Canada, were being killed each year for their fur when Greenpeace decided to start campaigning in 1976.
There were other people talking about ecology before Greenpeace, but with Greenpeace, the growth of ecology took off.
The helicopter and the clothing demonstrate the change in status. The whale campaign had generated an influx of donations. Greenpeace had money. Greenpeace could hit hard. The pictures were a condemnation in themselves. The shots of blood-stained ice went around the world, putting a stop to fur imports. Greenpeace was gaining international renown. Brigitte Bardot, a world-famous star at the time, came to support her Greenpeace family.
I am the same family. You want me like your sister?
Orange overalls were now in fashion.
We brought attention to ecology, but we also brought attention to ourselves. And so now Greenpeace was famous. The main difficulty we had is that Greenpeace groups began to spring up everywhere all over the world.
We'd get a letter with a stamp on it saying, "Greetings from Greenpeace Boston." And everybody would go, "Hey, yeah, we got Greenpeace in Boston." So it was growth, and it was growth like mushrooms after the rain.
C'était le bordel. C'était le bordel.
It was a mess.
Faut dire les choses telles qu'elles sont, mais c'était un peu inévitable puisque c'était une époque de...
It was a time of absolutely extraordinary creativity.
Tout à fait extraordinaire.
There was an old ship in the London docks that was about to be scrapped. The Sir William Hardy became the Rainbow Warrior, a beautiful name for a ship that would meet a tragic end. The name was suggested by Bob Hunter, who quietly withdrew to allow an old acquaintance to take the helm in Greenpeace.
Now we have to pull all this together. And David McTaggart was central to this because David had more experience than the rest. He had been a businessman. He had some experience in organizing people.
Because he was the one that pulled everybody together. And it was a very difficult thing to do. And he managed to succeed.
Yes, the answer is yes. You are under arrest.
Fine, we'll call you back in just a moment, please. Thanks very much.
Yes, thank you.
Now what?
David's vision was that we could build an organization that could address the issues that you couldn't address nationally. The transborder and the international issues, and that's where he saw the holes.
The former businessman saw Greenpeace as a green multinational. He moved the headquarters to Amsterdam. Financial independence was ensured by donations from the constantly growing membership of the organization. For McTaggart, who came into ecology via the Mururoa atoll, nuclear testing remained a priority. And the treatment of waste from nuclear power plants allowed Greenpeace to reveal another scandal.
None of the European states with a nuclear industry at the time bothered about the waste. They chucked it overboard 500 kilometers off the coast of Spain.
This is, hard to believe today. There were barrels of radioactive waste being dumped overboard, 55-gallon drum. That's it. Radioactive waste.
It was happening in front of our noses, not far from the coast of Spain. No one saw it or wanted to see it. After following the ships that were doing the dirty work, they brought out the Zodiacs. Then a strange sort of ballet started. It was all captured on film. But it wasn't just a game.
Presque eu un accident très grave puisque deux fûts de 800 kg, donc 1600 kg de déchets nucléaires se sont écrasés sur un Zodiac.
sans doute un pressentiment, j'ai appuyé sur le bouton pour une longue rafale. Toute la séquence du tonneau, c'est une photo qui a été très très longue, qui a voyagé tout autour de la Terre, qui a fait des centaines de publications. Le rapprochement entre l'action, la prise de photos et le résultat campagne, en moins de 6 mois, a été vraiment très spectaculaire.
6 months later, the London Convention adopted a moratorium on the dumping of nuclear waste at sea. Increased funding meant that more sophisticated communication methods could be explored, like this commercial made in 1982 by the photographer David Bailey. The nuclear industry was in their sights.
Quand on se frotte à l'industrie nucléaire mondiale, c'est quand même pas la petite usine du coin. Donc,
there are times when you say we're up against something quite big.
C'est quand même un petit peu gros ce qu'on a devant nous. Est-ce qu'on va réussir à faire bouger les lignes?
The tough part for an organization is if you're going after a big target, whether it's a corporation or a government. You either have to be so small they don't think that you're worthy of attention, like a mosquito stabbing at them, or you have to be so big that they can't take you on. He said the really dangerous point was right in the middle.
In the summer of 1985, Greenpeace was sailing in this in-between area, neither too small nor big enough, subject to every paranoia. And when the Rainbow Warrior arrived in Auckland for another anti-nuclear campaign, no one could have imagined that the elements of the drama were already in place. During the night of the 10th of July, 2 explosions sank the organization's flagship, causing the death of the only member of Greenpeace to die in action, the photographer Fernando Pereira.
I think that was the day we grew up. That day when the Rainbow Warrior was sunk and Fernando died. That would be the day we stopped being teenagers and became adults.
The trauma of becoming a target and knowing they had been infiltrated was enormous. The CIA, the KGB, the British Secret Services. Everything seemed improbable, but possible. In the end, the investigation proved that French Secret Services were responsible. Greenpeace was in the firing line and had no choice but to grow up.
That was a phenomenally difficult time. I mean, both because of what happened, and how it changed the organization.
C'est le ministère de la Défense qui a
It was the Ministry of Defense that changed Greenpeace into the world's leading environmental protection organization.
Dès la fin 1985, les Tchèques se sont mis à pouvoir sur
Greenpeace
comme la misère sur le bas monde.
And the supporters were joining at a phenomenal rate. And to be able to handle that actually insane growth was actually very, very difficult.
In the end, Greenpeace overcame the trauma using its own weapons. It staged the sinking of the Rainbow Warrior in Matori Bay in New Zealand in front of the world's TV cameras. With over 1 million members, Greenpeace needed to remobilize around an ambitious project.
There was so much money coming in, there was so much attention on the organization that we had to be really, really conscious to stick to what we do.
Greenpeace threw itself into a slightly crazy project to save Antarctica. The Wellington Convention, under the pretext of protecting the continent, authorized the exploration of its mining resources. It opened the door to large companies which wanted nothing more.
If we couldn't set aside this one place in the world from exploitation, how on earth could we save the rest of the planet? So we decided to go to the continent and set up our own base camp there.
It put us in the place where we could really know what we were talking about. There wasn't any way that we could be patronised by government. You could turn up and personally say, what you're saying is not true. Last week I saw it differently.
The construction of a base not only demonstrated the organisation's logistical capacity and its financial strength, above all, it meant that it had to be invited to international discussions. The Antarctica campaign underlined the change in Greenpeace's strategy, even its culture. The organisation started working behind the scenes in lobbying, very different from the usual direct action. We also had a very extensive campaign running very quietly behind the scenes at a very high level, pulling strings, people who knew people. One of those people was Jacques Cousteau, who became very engaged and very interested in this issue, and at one point launched a petition in France, and it received something like 1 million signatures. Ironically, it was the political situation in France that helped Greenpeace. Michel Rocard had just been appointed as Prime Minister. One of his tasks was to repair the damage caused by the sinking of the Rainbow Warrior.
Michel Rocard
phoned me and said, Bryce, we have to remove the stain on our national honour. We should never have done a thing like that. Come and help me set up a very strong environmental policy. And we particularly focused on the Pacific. What could we do for the environment of the South Pacific?
Well, I'll never forget, in 1989, I got a call from the person who we worked with in the Cousteau Foundation. He called me up and said, Kelly, France is going to abandon the Minerals Treaty and is going to go for environmental protection instead. And I said, yeah, okay, it sounds like a good thing. And he said, Kelly, we've just won the campaign. Having one country decide to abandon it was a huge thing. And then when we got Australia to do the same thing very shortly after that it was now just a matter of time. The first two dominoes had fallen and that there would be a chain reaction and the rest would start to fall after that, which is exactly what happened.
Antarctica was saved. Under the Madrid Treaty in 1991, the continent became a natural reserve. All mining activity was banned for a period of 50 years. Greenpeace, which had invested huge sums in this adventure, could savour its victory. But this success had a downside. Since it was obtained through working behind the scenes, it was pretty much invisible. The organisation gained little benefit. And at the same time, the ecological crisis was growing. The hole in the ozone layer, the nuclear disaster in Chernobyl, the chemical one in Bhopal, the greenhouse effect, the destruction of the Amazon rainforest. For the first time, the environment became a major concern. What legacy would be left for the children of the planet? Years after Stockholm, a second Earth Summit was organised in Rio. This time, because of the crisis, the heads of state and government came. It was the largest gathering of world leaders in history. For the first time, a declaration put development together with environmental protection. A climate change convention confirmed the need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Outside the official summit, 17,000 people attended different forums organised by representatives of 1,500 NGOs. The environment was becoming a political and social issue. Greenpeace could celebrate that, but the organisation was swamped in the crowd. Its message was becoming diluted and commonplace. There was an identity crisis and a financial one. Having been close to 5 million in 1990, membership was falling. Greenpeace needed to get back to its old image and its traditional methods. In 1995, it had just that opportunity. Since the 1970s and the rise in oil prices, the North Sea had become a vast field of oil platforms that had sprouted like weeds. But the platforms were getting old. How could they be disposed of? Shell was the first company to face the problem, and they had a very simple answer. They would send them to the bottom of the sea.
The oil companies intended to dump into the environment facilities that were a size comparable to the Eiffel Tower.
Waste going into the sea, the prospect of direct confrontation, it was too good an opportunity. Greenpeace once more launched the Zodiacs. A fierce battle began to occupy the Brent Spar platform.
So from the helicopter, we could look down and we saw all these little inflatables crisscrossing around the water with the water cannons pointing at them.
Once again, tragedy was only just avoided.
And I think both me and Elle realized at that moment that there were crew on board of the ships that wouldn't have a problem killing us.
Water cannons aimed at a helicopter were the step too far that transformed the campaign. Greenpeace Germany started a boycott of Shell petrol stations. The company lost €5 million per day. Finally, after a trial of strength lasting 6 weeks, Shell gave in. The platform would be towed to Norway. Greenpeace had won, but this victory was marred by one error. The amount of oil left on the platform was less than the figures Greenpeace had given to the press.
And there was a mistake in the sampling. The sampling was not adequately supervised. We honestly went out and said, we have made an error. We've made a sampling error. But the fact remains that chemicals or not, had there been absolutely no chemicals on the Brent Spar, we would have opposed it being dumped.
It didn't matter that Greenpeace was right about the principle. Its credibility was seriously harmed. But events quickly gave it an opportunity to bounce back.
France is going to restart nuclear testing.
After a wide consultation, I've taken this decision because I consider it necessary to the superior interests of our nation.
Jacques Chirac's announcement of more French nuclear tests in the Pacific opened a new chapter in the war that had opposed Greenpeace and France for nearly 25 years. Greenpeace reacted quickly, deploying exceptional forces of 2 ships and a helicopter. They headed for Mururoa. The first aim, to gain media coverage of the event, was quickly achieved. France was back in the dock. But this strong media presence changed the very nature of the campaign.
It was very much a media image war.
I'd never seen that, and I've never seen it since. I've never seen so many journalists from all over the world.
The whole world was watching this confrontation between Greenpeace and the might of France.
Rainbow Warrior, this is Lestrade. Your boat is inside the French territorial waters of Mururoa. I request you stop immediately.
And I am going to Mururoa.
The nuclear test slipped into the background. What the media were interested in was this naval battle between Greenpeace and its best opponent. But the battle was short-lived.
Yeah, they're about to get on board.
Greenpeace went for broke, crossed the perimeter of the Forbidden Zone, and the naval commandos attacked. In 2 hours, Greenpeace lost its 2 ships and also the battle for pictures. It was the French Navy's video footage that showed the assault to the whole world. Greenpeace's footage couldn't be sent out. These are the last pictures that were shot.
This is Rainbow Warrior. The French commandos have cut the main terminal, the main internal communication.
The seizure of the 2 ships was a big blow to our plans because both ships were capable of transmitting video footage out to the world. So in the sense that it didn't follow our plans, it was a failure.
Certainement, Greenpeace aussi.
Certainly, Greenpeace made mistakes, either through excessive arrogance sometimes or through naivety. So yes, we've seen a lot of backlashes.
As soon as the naval battle was over, the media quickly left and France continued its underground blasting. Even though Jacques Chirac ratified the nuclear test ban treaty the following year, the doubtful effectiveness of the operation and the confiscation of equipment for several months led Greenpeace to reconsider its method of action in a rapidly changing world.
You have to find new ways to tell your story, because once you've told your story in one way, it's not news anymore. So going out in Zodiacs and blockading boats, it's been done. People have seen it. So you have to continually reinvent yourself if you want to change society.
The World Trade Organization's summit in Seattle should have marked the advent of trade globalization. Instead, it revealed strong resistance to liberal globalization. The alter-globalist movements occupied the streets, captured people's attention, and focused anger.
Greenpeace was present in Seattle, but in a very limited way, and working on specific technical topics, which were Greenpeace's field. The place of the environment in international trade, but it didn't establish itself in the movement at that time.
What is our constitutional rights? Give me my constitutional rights, and you have them too. We don't. Nobody does. Go home. Go home. Go home.
Unexpected violence broke out in Seattle, and the usual benchmarks were shattered. Ecology had to be integrated into the movements in international trade, in the same way as other non-market values, such as human rights or fundamental rights of workers. Ecology could no longer be defined as the protection of resources. It also had to include the sharing of resources, taking into account the need of southern countries for development.
The north-south dimension of these problems wasn't part of the Greenpeace approach, but Greenpeace needed to position itself in relation to that movement.
Greenpeace opened new offices in continental China, India, Africa, and South America, and changed its line of attack. For example, in the Gulf of Guinea. This wasn't a protest to protect a threatened species. It was highlighting new fishing practices that were endangering the economic balance in the region rather than the ecological balance.
To limit the pressure of fishing around Europe, we sent our boats to fish off the coast of Africa with cooperation agreements with Morocco and Senegal, etc. And the direct effect was that pressure on fishing increased locally, meaning that small traditional fisheries were unable to be fished anymore. So a number of traditional fishermen had to give up their job. As they had boats, but they couldn't fish anymore, they became traffickers for migrants going to the Canaries. So it all comes full circle.
Here they mass-produce jeans. It could be electronic circuits or toys. There's pollution in China since it became the world's low-cost manufacturer. There's deforestation in South America or in Africa since they became suppliers of raw materials. In addition to condemning the scandal, Greenpeace transformed itself. It integrated the understanding of economic systems into its search for solutions. Symbolic of this evolution was the choice of the new executive director.
Hello, my name is Kumi Naidu. I'm from South Africa. Part of the problem the world faces at the moment is that we do not respond to global challenges in an interconnected way. You can't talk about environmental justice if you don't talk about economic justice, because environmental justice is impacted by the kind of economic practice that there is in the economy.
For example, in South America, rainforests and other natural landscapes are destroyed every day to make room for genetically engineered monocultures and pasture. At the same time, the genetic engineering lobby claims genetically engineered crops can help to reduce world hunger. Genetic engineering is not the answer.
La campagne
The genetic
OGM
engineering
nous a
campaign
permis
allowed
de
us
commencer
to
à nous
start to
positionner
position
sur un champ un
ourselves
peu
in a
plus
slightly
large où on a
broader
dit
arena where we said it's the
c'est le modèle
agricultural
agricole
model
qu'il
that must be
faut
looked at.
remettre en question.
Genetic engineering isn't just
Les
a
OGM,
French
c'est pas qu'une
question.
question
It's a question
franco-française,
of
c'est
food
aussi une question
sovereignty
de
in a number
souveraineté
of different
alimentaire dans un
countries in
certain
the
nombre de pays
world.
de la planète.
Ministry of Rice. Take this ingenious invention that Jean is carefully preparing. Looks like normal rice, you're thinking. But in fact, it's genetically modified rice. Oh, by its official name,
The new, mostly invisible threats laid down a real challenge to Greenpeace, which needed to reach a more fickle audience that was used to the internet.
behind this rice? Fire! Who makes the weed killer? Fire! Let's keep this in the family. It's so innovative and new, you'll be the first in the EU to test it.
How do we take those same things that we did in the era of television and recreate them in a way that works in social media? And looking at these things and going, all right, now how do we make a mind bomb out of this?
You'll have heard about climate change.
The new means of communication were a formidable tool in refining the strategy. To increase pressure on the industrial sector by choosing a high-profile company.
Greenpeace est une organisation qui dispose de ressources limitées.
Greenpeace is an organisation with limited resources.
Que nous dénonçons ont par contre des ressources qui sont illimitées. Les entreprises, c'est clair qu'on ne peut pas les attaquer tous au même moment. Donc une de nos stratégies, c'est la carotte et le bâton, où dans une première phase, on demande aux entreprises de se positionner et par rapport aux réponses que nous recevons, nous en identifions une, voire deux, contre lesquelles nous déployons alors notre capacité d'attaque et de lutte.
The impact of this campaign against Nestlé's use of palm oil, which encourages deforestation, was astonishing. It was viewed 1.5 million times in 2 months on the internet and forced Nestlé to stop using palm oil.
Le deuxième sur la liste dans son secteur industriel, vous l'appelez, et lui, il va décrocher son téléphone tout de suite en disant « Ok, on se voit ». Parce que, logiquement, il n'a pas envie de passer par la même phase de confrontation, ou alors il est complètement stupide, et en règle générale, ils ne sont pas complètement stupides. Ça ne marche pas toujours aussi bien que ça, mais en tout cas, c'est ce qu'une organisation comme Greenpeace cherche à faire en faisant ces jeux de dominos, faire tomber le premier pour qu'ensuite les autres.
Facebook lives in a big box full of computers. Facebook in the box eats a lot of special food called electricity. But silly Mark Zuckerberg chose dirty old code.
The same strategy was used against Facebook, along with great advertising, on the very ground that Greenpeace wanted to occupy, that of the social networks.
We have to actually think about new creative ways to intensify our pressure, to ensure that they become more responsive, respond with the urgency that is needed. The other challenge that we have is that the global media environment within which we operate has become one which actually promotes a particular kind of culture, a culture of overconsumption, a culture of violence. And when we have all of those things stacked against us, as activists, we are called upon to be much more creative, much more innovative, to rise above that dominant message.
There's two things that make it more difficult today. People's media attention has been fragmented by the number of sources for media that they can get, and the complexity of, in particular, the issue of climate change, where it's such a slow force
The challenge we have with climate change is because it's happening over time, it is much harder to show a camera and people to understand it immediately.
Climate change is the biggest environmental threat we as a civilization, we as a people, we as a planet have ever faced. And if we don't address it, that's it, game over.
Qui sont ces gens?
Who are these people?
Qui sont ces gens qui
Who are these people
apparemment
that appear to be
sont
on another
effectivement sur
layer
une
of
autre
interpellation?
couche d'interpellation, et c'est
And it's
exactement
exactly
ça.
that.
Greenpeace, c'est
Greenpeace is the
l'organisation
independent
indépendante
organisation which is
qui
on a layer
est
of governance
sur
that
une couche de
doesn't really
gouvernance qui
exist.
n'existe pas vraiment.
This is a funny phenomena about Greenpeace, is that when you look back, it seems an obvious thing to do. When you start out, it looks impossible. Everybody says you're crazy, you're nuts, you can't do that. And then when you look back, it looks inevitable.
I was 23 when that happened. If you're people of that age now, you know, just do it. Just go and you know, take the risks. Be scared about doing it. Find some people to work with. Don't be afraid about making mistakes. Connect with what's really important in who you are and go change the world.